Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today I wanted to talk about one of the most controversial topics in the Warhammer 40k universe: female Space Marines. Now I know you're already in the comments telling me how I'm wrong and incorrect and absolutely horrible as a person. And nothing is more peak Warhammer 40k than impassioned debates about random tabletop miniatures. That said, I am not above doing a hot take. So let's break it down. Why aren't there female Space Marines? Now, in lore, I understand that Games Workshop may have made some female Space Marines. They didn't sell so well. They made the Adeptus Sororitas. They sold awesome. And GW said, hey, we've got fighting factions of men and women. They sell great. People love them. They have their own vibe. And from a commercial standpoint, I have no problem with it. I love the fact that there's a female-only faction. I love that they have an entire different vibe to themselves, right? That they're not just dudes. They're not just, Space Marines with different head models. I think that's kind of cool. But let's talk about the lore, right? So this is a weird controversy for a couple of reasons, right? First and foremost, the Imperium is a horrible place. They're basically a human rights violations factory that sometimes kills a Xeno, right? They commit genocide. They have no freedom of speech. They're horrifically cruel to even their most loyal citizens and soldiers. And of course, they do unspeakable things to someone who is even a mild dissenter. So I don't really understand why some people, right, some of the community, get so up in arms when you point out that the totalitarian, theocratic, neo-space fascists may also be a little sexist. But in lore, why aren't there female Space Marines? Well, as we know, Space Marines are based on sort of the, ultra 10 times Xeroxed copy of the Primarchs, right? They've got their Primarch gene seed, they get implanted into a recruit, and they're sort of grown over a period of years into a Space Marine, very much on the model of their Primarch, right? And so why then do we have to ask, and did the Emperor make those Primarchs, right? Because the Space Marines and the chapters, they're not going to do anything creative, right? They have, the Imperium, as we know, in addition to being horrible for a host of reasons, also hates science and hates anything new. And so they definitely hate the idea of trying something new with making their Space Marines. So Space Marines, 0% chance they're going to recruit women because the Primarchs weren't women. And that's the question we got to answer. Why aren't there women Primarchs? It would make sense that they would show up, right? The Emperor wanted his 20, sort of human-like beings to represent humanity, to be humanity's greatest champions and the embodiments of them, champions, statesmen, strategists, administrators, moral leaders. And so it seems sort of silly that you made 20 of them and you didn't think to represent, the entire half of humanity that has 2 X chromosomes. And yes, it's true, the Emperor was also looking to make derivatives of himself, and that may be a partial explanation, but the Emperor also did a bunch of gene editing at a level that is pretty wild. He added canine DNA to some of them, right? Sanguinius had like bird stuff in him, right? Like there's no shortage of extra DNA that the Emperor stuck in there. And I want to point out that regular old dumb biological reproduction successfully takes genetic material from the male contributor and puts it into the offspring regardless of gender. And so I really doubt that the 12-foot tall mega god emperor genius who can see through time couldn't figure out how to do what regular old, bumpin' uglies does and has done throughout history, which is produce in a offspring a female offspring, aspects of the male's genetic code and the female's genetic code. So I'm not really buying that argument that it was too complex for the emperor to do. However, and you know what? Actually, I want to point out that there is some evidence that he could have, right? In one of the books, Malkador actually makes a throwaway comment that he recommended the emperor make the Primarchs all sisters, which of course is also still pretty sexist and not really helpful, but to me, that implies that Malkador understood that the emperor could have done so should he have wanted to. So why didn't he want to? Well, there's a lot of debate here, but my theory goes something like this. The emperor was born in 8000 BC-ish, right? And it's still sort of fuzzy. But he's got his immortality, right? And he's, the embodiment of the shamans of old. But ultimately, the emperor is still a person, right? He was born of a mother and a father. He was raised in a family. He grew up and he achieved adulthood, right? And then sort of ended up, 40,000 years later, 50,000 years later, becoming a god. But the point is, he had a regular childhood and a regular young adulthood. And that young adulthood and childhood took place in the Stone Age, in the Neolithic era. And the year 8000 BC is actually significant. And that's because that is right smack dab in the middle of when a tremendous change swept through humankind. That is the agricultural revolution. See, the hunter-gatherer era meant that men and women spent about 75% of their time gathering food. But because they were low density, because they were very active, they ate a huge variety of food, meat that they hunted or and vegetables, fruits that they would gather. And so they were actually a really healthy subset, or a healthy iteration of humanity. Diseases, because weren't able to spread among the populations because human beings just weren't that dense. There just weren't that many of them, right? But in the agricultural revolution, things really changed, right? The number of calories a human being ate went way up, but the variety of food they ate went way down. So you would see these diets that were 85, 90% corn, grain, bread, very simple, very repetitive, and really unhealthy for human beings. But because you had more calories, a couple of weird changes happened. One, because human beings weren't going anywhere, disease, the instance of disease, and the danger diseases posed went way up, right? You started to have these fixed towns where you would have outbreaks of plagues. You also saw a change in human reproductive behavior. So life expectancy actually didn't increase, it may have even gone down. The life expectancy in this era for someone who already reached adulthood was about 33 years old. And in those 33 years, an adult woman would be expected to give birth 6 times. And because health conditions got so much worse when human beings became sedentary, it meant that the infant mortality rate went up tremendously. It went from about 1 in 5 live births wouldn't survive to adulthood to almost 1 in 3. And what that meant is that in the era the emperor was born in, he would have seen women's role be basically caretaker of children, period. Because again, even with the maximum amount of attention, the maximum amount of care provided to these 6 children you were likely to have before you died at 30, you needed, right, you still could expect to have almost 1 in 3 of your children die. And so that meant that women were always constantly pregnant, nursing, or diligently trying to make sure their children didn't die of sickness, disease, accidents, or predators. And so if you're the emperor, right, imagine you're born into this world and you're a child in this world and you see that this is the fundamental order of humanity, or you internalize this is true, right? And again, the emperor, born in 8000 BC. So he may not have understood that there was a previous era where things were just they were still unequal, right? Men were still bigger and taller, and women were still shorter and weaker. But, you know, they were somewhat more equal. But in this new agricultural revolutionary world, right, it looked like women's role was caring for children, period, full stop. And if the emperor believed that was the fundamental true nature of humanity, then that would show up, right? That internalized schema would be in his head because he learned it as a child, right? It's like learning a language, right? And a child learns a language, they can adopt it as a native, never have an accent. But as an adult, no matter how hard you work, no matter how long you live, you'll never be able to erase an accent entirely. And I think that's true, even of someone as powerful as the emperor, right? He would have seen these internal gender roles of men do literally everything else, and women, their primary role is as caretakers, trying desperately to stop these very sick, right, very voluminous children from dying. And so, as the emperor moved through time, right, as an ageless being, he still would have carried this with him, I think. And so when it came time for him to create his generation of champions, statesmen, warriors, scholars, he went to his core belief that the ideal warrior is a man. The ideal scholar is a man. The ideal statesman is a man, right? I think that's what probably would have happened, and it would make sense that the emperor would view his own ideals, right, and manifest them. I mean, literally, the Primarchs are the emperor's ideals in a literal way. So, of course, he would adopt those and manifest those in the 20 Primarchs. So, the other question, the real question, is could there ever be female Space Marines in the Warhammer 40k universe? Again, as we discussed, in the Imperium, the answer is pretty clearly no. They're so stuck in tradition that they can't perceive or conceive of a different way of doing things. And, of course, even if they wanted to make female Space Marines, without learning new technologies or engineering new ways of doing things, they wouldn't be able to. But, I have a theory of how it could happen. And for that, we need to look to our friends, the Tau. Maybe the only race willing to actually do a little bit of engineering work. Now, we know that, of course, if a Space Marine falls into the clutches of someone like the Tyranids, the hive mind will definitely pick them apart, try to understand how they work, and integrate Space Marine technology into the Tyranid hive. So, logically, to me, the Tau would encounter these fearsome figures on the battlefield, the Space Marines, and of course, if they can capture one, or even a dead one, they will pick that thing apart. They will learn everything they can about the power armor, everything they can about the Space Marine themselves, and try to figure out how they created this newfangled Space Marine. And if they could capture, let's say, a facility that actually does the transportation, if they were able to seize a world that was the home world of a chapter maybe, and could really look hard at the records and get a good understanding of how Space Marines were made, I wouldn't be surprised if the Tau got it in their head that they were going to make their own Space Marines. But, of course, biologically, they can't do it with the fire case. They would have to use the Guavesa, their human acolytes. Now, the Tau, you might remember, have no external secondary sex characteristics. A male Tau and a female Tau don't look any different. And so to a Tau, right, if they didn't evolve differently, probably their schema, right, on a fundamental level, is that men and women don't really meaningfully differ except in reproduction, right? So it would not surprise me in the least if the Tau never realized that among human beings there's these vast gender differences. They might not even care. And again, in a modern technology-heavy society, those gender differences probably don't look that important, right? If they have for example, a Tau, hive world, the factories are going to be staffed by men and women. The guard that gets recruited is going to be men and women. and the leadership and elite will be men and women. So the Tau may not realize that there's a gender essentialism at work in the Space Marines. And so the Tau, I imagine, will just start recruiting humans, young humans, to run the Space Marine protocols on. And of course, they're going to fail. They're going to kill all the kids, and they'll go back to the drawing board and engineer it and try to get it right, and go back to the drawing board and kill more kids and have them go crazy after a while and engineer it and tweak the dials a little bit. But eventually, I suspect the Tau will figure it out. The Tau would figure it out, and they wouldn't even realize they had done it because they didn't realize it was important, but they would have a protocol that works on the human beings with the X chromosome and the XY chromosomes, right? And the result would be, of course, Space Marines in Tau-style power armor, 8 feet tall, looking like dudes, because let's be honest, we all know that the Space Marine creation process would be so disruptive to the human endocrine system that you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a male and female Space Marine. They would be 8 feet tall, they would be 400 feet wide, they'd be built like a refrigerator ate a linebacker, and they would be in shapeless, unhelpful, unsexy power armor. So, guys, what do you think about my theory? Do you think the Tau would actually pull something like that off? GW, if you're listening, don't do this without at least giving me some royalty payments of your first model of mixed gender Tau Space Marine clones. And let me know, do you think the Imperium is sexist, right? Do you think, yeah, they're happy to send the Guard to die together, but I still think there's a lot of sexism in addition to, of course, all the other horrible things that make the Imperium. But let me know in the comments, or if I got something in the lore wrong. Oh, and also, guys, be sure to check out the shirts. Got the merch store. You can see it. Keep the shirts hung up there. That's all below. Please click it. Pick up some merch. I got stickers and coffee mugs and all sorts of fun stuff. It's a great way to support the channel. And until next time, I will see you guys later.